Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another video on Shiny. This time is another pattern that I use. It's not video check. It's a pattern that I use quite frequently, but I have to be honest, I see very little of it out there in the real world. Shiny uses that internally in some places. So that's one indication that maybe I'm onto something. Also, it required using an unexported function of Shiny for quite some time, but I noticed that recently in version 1.6 they have exported said function. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about from Shiny serving dynamic endpoints that generally serve data that we can fetch from the client. So by endpoint, generally, we mean some sort of path in the application. So Shiny being built for single page applications, you can't really create, well, another path, which would be another page. So you load your Shiny application and the page is loaded. It loads just the once. And there's no other path to access. However, with Shiny, you can create paths that are session dependent, and generally these will serve data that you can then fetch from the front end. It doesn't allow you, there's nothing this allows you to do that you can't do already in with probably everything that you know Shiny already. However, I find personally that it cleans up my code quite a bit. Namely, the idea of serving data from the front end, of course, pertains to fetching data from the server. And the way you do that in Shiny generally with the whole reactive paradigm is from the front end, we're going to send a request for data, and the server is going to send that data back. And that makes for, in my mind, sometimes in large applications, quite a few moving pieces. Ideally, I get that all done within one piece of code, if you like. So at the moment I want to get the data, I can fetch that endpoint, get that data, do something with it, be done. And everything is sort of more, at least in my mind, more self-contained, understandable and readable. In any event, let me share my screen and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So first, we have the upgrade notes for Shiny 1.6, and if we scroll down under minor new features and improvements, we should see the function that I'm talking about, which I can't find right now. It's called HTTP, oh, I just saw HTTP response. So now from, we can create the endpoint, and the endpoint obviously, when pinged, must return an HTTP response. This function will let you do that. On the right, I have bog standard Shiny app. It really doesn't do anything yet. It's a blank page. Only thing that I have is a script. The console logs here, hello. So I haven't got much going on. The idea, and bear with me please, is that we open this endpoint that we can then ping from the front end. So my idea of what we could do here is add a button, and when we click the button, it fetches the data via the endpoint, and then I don't know, we'll just print it on the screen, do something a bit dull with it. That's not the point of the video here. So first, to do so, we're gonna need, well, the button. So let me check if it's big enough. It looks like it's big enough. We're gonna create a button. It's gonna be called get data. And then what I'm gonna have, I'm just gonna do the classes. Button info, so it's a bit pretty. We can give it an ID. That way we can have the observer on the ID is gonna be called, yeah, that's simple. So this is the button, and the button we have to generate data, well, show the data eventually on the screen. So I'm going to create an anchor for that here, which I'm going to call data. data. Let's just create data. So what I want to do now is add an observe event so that when we click on this button, something happens. Currently, not much will happen because I haven't done anything about the endpoint just yet, but at least we can verify that this works. It's going to take an event, and here I'm just going to consolidate all of the events. So normally we should see something being logged in the console when running this. So now we have our beautiful get data button, and if I click, nothing. Refresh, nothing. So let's see what I've done wrong. ID of get on click console log data. I think what may be happening is that this is running before anything is available, so we're gonna do it like so to make sure it runs after the page was loaded. And if that doesn't work, well, I'm gonna have to look deeper into this. Hopefully now, yeah, now we see the event. All right, we got this figured out. Now obviously I don't want to just log the event here. I want to get some data from the endpoint, but the endpoint for one doesn't exist. So let's create that. The way we're gonna do this, I can make this smaller. It's too small now. All right, sorry. How are we going to do this? Bear with me, because the way this works is a bit, I'm not good at explaining stuff to begin with. One wonders why I'm doing these videos, but the way this is gonna work, here is how I'm gonna go about it. Function reference, and essentially we're gonna need something from the session object. The old mysterious session object that none of us really understands. There is this method on the session object called register data obj, which I think sort of indicates that it's to register data objects. And here's where I said purchase an R object as a URL endpoint that is unique to this session. And that's what I meant by session dependent earlier. The function takes 3 arguments. The name of the endpoint, although it be dynamically generated, so it doesn't matter so much to the best of my understanding. The actual data that the endpoint will use, and the filter function is the function that will take the data, the requests, and return with HTTP response the data. So I suggest we start with the filter function. We'll go about this sort of inside out. The filter function, I'm gonna call it, well, you know what, I'm gonna call it filter function. It's a bit of a filter. It's not a great name for a function. It's not a great name for an argument either, in fairness. But it's gonna take data. The data object is gonna be this. And essentially what we want to do, like I said, is return HTTP response. So let's look at shiny HTTP response. Yeah, it takes a few arguments, but they're fairly easy. All right, what we're going to do is HTTP, self-explanatory. Status is the the HTTP status code. So generally you'll leave it at 200. That means the response was successful. If you're not familiar with these, you get a 404 not found browsing a website. That's what you get. It's an error code 404, 500 internal server error, etc. Now content type is relevant here because we're not going to return here by default text HTML. We're going to return application JSON. We're going to return JSON data. And the content, well, we haven't defined that. I'm going to convert the data with JSON light. I'm going to use the function to JSON to convert the data. One argument I really like is auto unbox true. I have plenty of that about that in the book that I have for JavaScript for R, but essentially, interestingly enough, in R we don't have scalar values, right? So x equals 1 is dot vector x is true. Everything's a vector, so by default it's going to serialize. When it serializes to JSON, which has scalar values, everything's going to be in arrays, and just generally not what you want. Where the vector is of length 1, we want a we want a scalar value. So this is all it does. So like this, we should be good. Now what we're missing is we need to pass this function filter func to register data obj, and it should be, I guess, written here of what it returns. Maybe not, but it returns the path that it dynamically generated. So what we're gonna have here, we're gonna have a path, and we're gonna use session register data ob. It's gonna take a name. The name is kind of a unique identifier, which is gonna be, I'm just gonna use serve the cars data set here that just serializes to JSON. We'll do something slightly more interesting. We currently totally ignore the request. We don't need that here. It doesn't matter. Whatever the request, we return the data. We'll do something with that later. The data will be ours, and the filter function is going to be filter func. We don't call it, so don't use the brackets. We pass the function. That's how we're going to do this. Now this is going to return a path, and you know what? For now, I'm just going to run this and print. That way, that'll give us some idea of what's going on. And let's run this. Hey, not too bad. So I have a path, but notice that it's session dependent. So if I take this path, I'm gonna right click copy. If I put it here, when I hit enter, we're gonna have an error. Not found. The path that we created is not found, which seems like a mistake, but it's not. R being session based, when I'm back here, I hit back the back button, we see it logged another one, and you can clearly see that the path generated is different. As soon as I visit this other path, we've changed session essentially. So what I'm going to do is trick it. I'm just going to keep this open. I'm going to select the newly generated path, copy. Hopefully this time, unless I'm mistaken, it should work, and we should see the JSON data on the screen. Hey, not too bad. So that's the cars data set serialized. You have the raw data here. Not too shabby. Now, what we need to do is this path is currently on the server, and what I want to do is send custom message. I want to send it to the front end, because essentially I want to call this path from here, not from the server. Though I'm going to do this here, I'm going to send it through the WebSocket. Essentially, I used that in the previous video, I think. So I'm just going to name this path, and what we're going to send this path. We're going to leave it like so. I'm not sure I can use this outside of an observer, but we'll see if it works. So since I'm sending this here, I'm going to have shiny.app custom message handler, which is the handler for path. It's gonna take the message. Right now, I'm just gonna console log the message. Just to make sure that things work. Really baby steps, really. That's how I go about it. Right. Let's see if we get an error if this works. And we see the path has been logged. That's not too bad. I could simplify the code somewhat here, maybe. What I'm gonna do is move everything out of this. Now, you know what we're gonna do? It's not great. We shouldn't do it like this, but for the sake of keeping the video simple, we're gonna do it like so. I'm gonna find the path here outside of this. It's still like, it's just like, you know, there's the system of scope in JavaScript, right? So what I can do here after is the path is equals to a message, and normally in here, not colon, semicolon, here I can log the path. It's not great code, I'll admit, but for this bit we will just keep it simple. Now I shouldn't log anything, but if I click get data, I should console log the path that was set previously. Yeah, it keeps logging it here. All right, so we've got something that works. Now what I want to do is, when we have this path here, I want to fetch the path of the function from JavaScript. One cool thing essentially is that it does that asynchronously. So code that I have after will keep running. This is not non-blocking code, so any code that's after this will run, which makes this rather efficient. So, and fetch, you can think of it by default, what it does is like HTTR get. And generally, if you've done that before, when you use HTTR get, I think it returns a response. Well, it must, obviously. Does it say somewhere what it returns? Value a response object, and from the response generally extract the content. And in HTTR you're going to use content like this, and that's a bit what we have to do here. So it's going to return a response. Note we use the then pipe because it's asynchronous. That's how it's handled in JavaScript. That's the whole of the world to explore, but we're not going to do this here today. So once I've extracted the JSON from the response, I'm going to have some data. And again, we're just going to console log that data. Now, if I rerun our application, hopefully, when I click the button, it should fetch from the path and it should extract the JSON and log the data. And it does. Not too bad. Now, real quick on what I mean by non-blocking, back here have some console log. No, you know what? I'm gonna leave it like this for now. I'll show you that later on. I just have to remember. What I want to do here is, what are we gonna show? I have this div and I said I would show the data. How can I show this data? Interestingly, I probably can't. We're gonna turn the JSON. I think we can, I named it, I have the ID data on this. I'm just gonna display the data with, probably we can just do text. It's gonna be a bit dull, I apologize. And then we can have JSON.minify. We're gonna create a string from the data. I couldn't make it more dull, but let me try and see if it works. Test is not a function. Test. I meant to write test. Close these. Refresh. Get data, and we see the data. Ideally, you'd show that nicely, but this is not the purpose of this video. Now, real quick. Let's say, to show that it runs asynchronously, because that's one of the main advantages of this. I'm going to log below that ran this, and I'm going to purposely slow our endpoint down. So what happens when we click the button, we fetch the path, and what that does is send a request to this path that was generated, which runs the filter function, which eventually returns this. So what I can do is sit.sleep, and we're gonna see 5 seconds. So normally it's gonna take 5 seconds for the response to be sent back, more or less 5 seconds. But this should not print after 5 seconds. It should print as soon as we hit the get data. So I'm gonna click get data. We should see ran this. I think that's the mention. Yeah, ran this, but the data is not yet gonna show. Yeah, and we see ran this, and we keep, I don't know, 5 seconds, and here is the data. So that's really, really nifty if you do loads of stuff with in the front end. With JavaScript, asynchronous is magical. So one thing I want to do is, currently we don't do anything with the request. We can do plenty of stuff, but one thing I have in mind is we currently return all of the data. What I want to do is add a select input here, which will allow us to return data on a specific column instead. Right. So label, I'm gonna call it column, and the choices should be, well, the names of the cars data set. So let me run this to make sure we're all on the same page. So now I have this. I can change to this, and normally when I click this button, it should get the column, use the column in the endpoint, and return just the data for that column. The way we're gonna do this, 2 bits again. First, we need to get the column. The way I'm gonna do this is, again, when we click the button, we're gonna get, let's column, it's gonna be, wait, how did I name this again? I think I named it column singular. Let me check. Input ID is column. So I go on the input ID column, I get the value just like so. Now, how do I pass this to the endpoint? We're gonna use a query argument parameter. Always confused. So we're gonna get the path, and then we're gonna add column equals. I could just do column like that, but that means it's passed as is. Nothing is encoded. It's going to be passed in the URL. Nothing is encoded. And ideally, I'd like it to be. In this case, we don't have spaces or any strange characters, so it's not an issue. But just so you know, you can do it like this here. Column. So now this is passed here, but it's not being used by our endpoint. And this is going to be part of the request. And bear with me because I always get this wrong. What we want to fetch is the query. There's a function from a shiny parse query string to parse it, because it's going to be a string and we want to ideally a nice structured object. I think it's called query string, all caps, like so. And then I'm gonna print the query here. We're gonna explore that a bit because I feel like maybe too much is going on. So we're gonna print the query here. And here what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy this and copy the path. So you see a bit what's happening. Console.log. No, not like so, like so. So we also log the path that we create, which incidentally may help me if something's not working as it should. So I should open the console. I've got speed, and let's see. Okay, I still have this ran this, but as you can see, there's our path as it was, and we've appended this column speed thing. And on the server, I got it right. We parse the query string and we obtain the nonce, which is a cryptographic thing for better security for Shiny. Good thing, but we don't need it. This, I'll be honest with you, is this empty argument here that I'm not sure what it is, but we have the column. And there we have it essentially. So if I have this, now I can use it here. Instead of returning all the data, we're gonna go print. We're gonna go query, and I'm gonna select the column. Now, if I rerun this, speed, we should get the speed, dist, we should get the dist. Lovely. So that's something I use that's pretty, I find, I like a lot this pattern, and I think I don't know, in JavaScript generally, that's the kind of thing, that's how you'd go about it to communicate with the server in many cases. Or Rather, I should say it's the more traditional way of going about it. So should I leave it? I think I'll just leave it at this. There's a bit of cleanup using this path as a variable that's outside the scope is not great, but this is stuff that you can clean up yourself. But what I want to stress here is really this asynchronous nature of this snippet of code makes it really neat. And then once you have this endpoint, you can use it in many places. You can guard against the query being there. You can have one endpoint that can serve either the entire data set or just specific values. You can pass other arguments, which we could very well do. We can pass a query string to divide everything here by 2, by 5. You can do other operations that you want. So I think it's a pretty nifty trick. I use it a ton. Hopefully it's a good idea. And then again, I hope it helps some of you, gives you some idea of stuff you can do. Right, thanks, bye for now.